Reema Suryan's sudden disappearance, Anay Vardel's burning rage, and Sahil Triven's dangerous secrets collided in Bengaluru's most chilling crime, the Mahalakshmi Fridge Case, where a brutal murder was hidden in plain sight inside a sealed refrigerator. In the heart of Bengaluru, where the city's noise often drowns out the quiet lives of ordinary people, Mahalakshmi Layout stood as a neighborhood that balanced tradition with modernity. The streets were narrow but alive, lined with small shops, fruit vendors, and homes built close together. It was here that Reema Suryan had chosen to live after her separation. At 28, she was independent, determined to start fresh, and careful about keeping her personal life private. She rented a small single-floor house that was modest but comfortable. Those who passed by often noticed her neat appearance and her punctual routine. She was the kind of woman who seemed to have her life in order, at least on the surface. Every morning she left for work, dressed in crisp office clothes, carrying a black handbag, and every evening she returned quietly, never causing trouble for anyone. For neighbors, Reema was polite but distant, the type who kept her circle very small. But in the final week of her life, that orderly routine came to a sudden halt. The first sign came when her colleagues at the office began to wonder why she had not shown up on Monday. At first, they thought she might have taken a leave of absence, but no message had been sent. By Tuesday, her manager tried calling her, but her phone was switched off. When Wednesday came and went without any word, uneasiness spread through her workplace. Friends messaged her social media accounts, but there was no reply. Meanwhile, in Mahalakshmi Layout, the silence around her house grew heavier each day. The windows were shut, the door locked, and the lights never turned on at night. Her landlord, Prakash Devnar, grew particularly concerned. Reema had never delayed her rent in the past, and she was known for being responsible with her payments. The month was ending, and not only had she failed to pay, but she had also disappeared without informing anyone. He tried knocking on her door several times, hoping she might be inside and unwell, but no answer came. By the fourth day, something unusual began to spread through the air. A faint odor started seeping from her house, one that neighbors at first brushed aside as garbage or drainage issue. But as the days passed, the smell grew stronger and harder to ignore. Some neighbors whispered among themselves that perhaps she had left the city in a hurry, abandoning the house and forgetting to clean out the refrigerator. Others wondered if she might have had an accident somewhere, leaving the house in neglect. Bengaluru had seen its share of tragic news in the past, and people knew that sometimes the most shocking discoveries came from behind closed doors in ordinary homes. By the weekend, unease had shifted into alarm. Nobody could shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong inside the silent house of Reema Suryan. What made the situation more unsettling was the fact that she had very few visitors. On rare occasions, people had seen a man visiting her, but she never introduced him to anyone. The mystery of her personal life now became part of the growing speculation in the neighborhood. Was she in trouble before she vanished? Had she been hiding something about her past? The questions piled up, but the answers were locked away inside the house, where the smell was now too overwhelming to be ignored. By the seventh day, the community could no longer remain silent. The landlord finally contacted the local authority. When police arrived, the neighbors gathered outside in tense anticipation, whispering about what might be found. For many, it was the first time they realized how little they truly knew about the young woman who had lived among them. To them, she had been just another face in the crowd, someone who carried herself with grace, but kept her distance. Now her absence had turned into the center of a chilling mystery. The first step of the investigation had begun, and the truth waiting inside her house would soon reveal the terrifying reality of the Mahalakshmi Fridge Case. The officers who arrived at the quiet house in Mahalakshmi Layout expected a routine welfare check. They had been told by the landlord and neighbors that a tenant had not been seen for over a week, that her phone was off, and that a strange odor was spreading from inside. Cases like these sometimes ended with finding someone who had fallen ill or left town without notice. But as soon as the police stepped into the small rented home of Reema Suryan, they sensed this was different. The air inside was heavy, suffocating, and the stench seemed to seep through every corner of the house. It was the kind of smell that seasoned officers instantly recognized, a smell that usually meant only one thing. The living room appeared normal, as if untouched. A sofa was neatly placed, the table still had magazines stacked in order, and nothing looked out of place. But a strange silence lingered, the kind that unsettled even the most experienced investigator. Moving cautiously through the rooms, the officers noted that the bedroom was tidy, the bed properly made, and no signs of forced entry or struggle were visible. For a moment it seemed like the woman had simply walked out, leaving everything behind. But as they approached the kitchen, the source of the foul odor became clear. In the corner stood a large refrigerator. It was old, slightly rusted, and sealed tightly with layers of brown packing tape. The smell was strongest here, escaping through tiny gaps. The officers exchanged uneasy glances. A fridge should not be taped shut, not unless someone wanted to keep something hidden inside. One of the policemen carefully cut away the tape, while another braced himself for what they might uncover. As the heavy door was pulled open, the truth inside froze them in place. Wrapped tightly in plastic sheets and pressed against the freezer walls was a human body. The body was curled unnaturally, as though forced into the limited space. The sight was grotesque, the skin pale from the cold, but the marks of violence unmistakable. The officers recoiled for a moment, the weight of what they had discovered pressing down on them. This was no accident, no ordinary disappearance. This was murder, planned and hidden in the most chilling way. The house that had seemed so ordinary from the outside had become the site of one of the most disturbing discoveries the area had ever seen. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood. Residents who had gathered outside were soon whispering in fear, their suspicions confirmed in the worst possible way. News reporters were alerted, and within hours the story was already spreading across the city. The once quiet Mahalakshmi layout was now buzzing with police cars, flashing lights, and horrified neighbors trying to piece together how such a terrible thing could have happened in their midst. Forensic teams arrived to carefully remove the body from the refrigerator. It was soon confirmed that the victim was indeed Reema Suryan, the missing tenant. The first step was to establish the cause of death. Initial observations suggested she had been strangled before being placed in the fridge. There were marks on her body that hinted at a struggle, though the exact details would only come through further examination. What was clear, however, was that this was no random act of violence. Whoever had done this had not only killed Reema, but had also taken steps to hide the crime in a cold, calculated manner. The police began collecting evidence from every corner of the house. Fingerprints were lifted, personal belongings were catalogued, and even the tape on the fridge was carefully preserved. Investigators noted that nothing in the living room or bedroom seemed stolen, suggesting robbery was not the motive. Instead, this looked personal, as if the killer had a reason to silence her. The case was now bigger than just a missing person report. Bengaluru police realized they had a high-profile crime on their hands, one that would soon grip the city with fear and curiosity. Media outlets labeled it the Mahalakshmi Fridge Case, and the name stuck. People across the city began speculating about who could have been behind such a horrific act, and why. For the investigators, the challenge had just begun. They had a body, a crime scene, and a city demanding answers, but the identity of the killer and the motive behind this chilling act remained locked in shadows, waiting to be uncovered. The discovery of Reema Suryan's body in the refrigerator sent shockwaves through the entire city, but for the investigators, the real work had just begun. A murder this deliberate, carried out with such disturbing concealment, was unlikely to be random. It had to be connected to her personal life, her relationships, or her past. Detectives began piecing together her history, starting with the people closest to her. The first name that surfaced was her estranged husband, Anay Vardel. Neighbors recalled seeing him outside her house weeks before she vanished, and some remembered heated exchanges. Their marriage had collapsed due to his controlling nature, and she had been living separately ever since. That tension made him an immediate suspect. The police dug into his background and discovered a history of aggression. He had once been accused of harassment by another colleague at his workplace, but had avoided serious consequences. Friends of Reema quietly admitted that she had been afraid of him, even after the separation. His jealousy and inability to let go of their failed marriage painted him as someone who might have had a motive to end her life. When confronted with the news of her death, Anay appeared shocked, but investigators knew better than to take initial reactions at face value. His name moved higher on their list of suspects. But then came another twist. CCTV footage collected from nearby streets showed a different man entering Reema's home on several occasions. This man was identified as Sahil Triven, a 25-year-old gym trainer who lived in the same locality. Unlike Anay, Sahil was not tied to her past but to her present. He visited her late in the evenings, sometimes staying for hours. Detectives quickly realized that Reema had formed a close relationship with him, something she had not revealed to most people. His repeated presence raised the question of whether this connection was simply companionship or something deeper, perhaps even romantic. When police called Sahil in for questioning, they learned he had known Reema for nearly 6 months. Their relationship began at the gym where she trained, and over time it had grown more personal. He admitted to spending time with her but denied any involvement in her death. He claimed she trusted him and even helped him financially. That statement caught the investigators' attention. Financial records soon confirmed that Reema had indeed transferred significant amounts of money to Sahil's account. Why would a woman who was living independently and carefully budgeting her expenses give away large sums to someone she had known for such a short time? The answer to that question could reveal whether Sahil had exploited her trust. Still, suspicion could not be confined to him alone. The investigation revealed Reema had once filed a complaint against Anay, citing harassment, though she later withdrew it under family pressure. That complaint, however, painted a clear picture of a man who refused to accept rejection. Police wondered whether Anay had been tracking her life, watching her movements, and whether he had learned about her connection with Sahil. If jealousy and rage had consumed him, that could explain the brutal murder. Investigators examined the house for more clues. They discovered fingerprints belonging to both Anay and Sahil in different parts of the home. This discovery complicated the case, suggesting that both men had been present there at different times. One question loomed larger than all. Had one of them killed her alone, or were they both involved in a plan that spiraled out of control? As the case unfolded, Bengaluru media latched onto the story, portraying it as a deadly triangle of love, obsession, and betrayal. Headlines screamed about the two men in her life, while neighbors who barely knew her speculated about what might have gone wrong. For detectives, the noise from outside only added pressure. They had to untangle the truth before it slipped away under the weight of rumors. With every lead, the picture grew darker. The presence of two men with clear motives meant this was no simple investigation. It was not yet clear whether Reema had been betrayed by the man she once married, deceived by the man she trusted in the present, or destroyed by a collision of both. The deeper the investigators went, the more it became clear that her murder was not just a crime of opportunity, but the outcome of dangerous secrets colliding in the quiet lanes of Mahalakshmi Lane. The case took a darker turn when investigators shifted their focus toward the financial details that tied Reema to Sahil Triven. The discovery of repeated bank transfers from her account to his suggested more than just a casual relationship. Reema, who was otherwise cautious about money, had been giving him large sums over several months. When investigators pressed further, they learned she had withdrawn additional cash just days before she went missing. It was clear that Sahil was benefiting financially from her trust, and this created a shadow of doubt around his involvement. Could greed have pushed him into playing a part in her death? Searching Sahil's apartment, police stumbled upon items that chilled them further. Under his bed, neatly hidden away, were some of Reema's personal belongings. They found pieces of jewelry, a few of her clothes, and even her original identification card. When questioned, Sahil insisted she had given them to him voluntarily, but investigators were not convinced. Why would a woman hand over such personal things, especially her ID? To the officers, it looked like an attempt to keep trophies, or perhaps as a way of misdirecting suspicion. His denials sounded thin compared to the evidence piling against him. Yet just when the focus seemed to tighten on Sahil, another revelation shifted the spotlight back onto Anay Vardel. A forensic team analyzing household items made a discovery that could not be ignored. The refrigerator in which Reema's body had been stuffed had been purchased only 2 days before her disappearance. Records from the store showed the buyer's name, Anay Vardel. This detail changed everything. The act of buying a fridge right before the crime was not coincidence, but a sign of planning. It suggested the killer had anticipated the need to conceal her body, something that pointed directly at Reema's estranged husband. The puzzle now seemed more complex than ever. On one side stood Sahil, financially entangled with Reema, hiding her belongings in his room, a man who may have been using her for money. On the other stood Anay, the ex-husband, filled with resentment and clearly capable of violence, who had bought the very fridge where her body was found. Investigators began to piece together a theory that perhaps this was not the work of just one man. What if Sahil and Anay, despite their differences, had both played a role? Detectives traced phone records and found disturbing overlap. On the day Reema vanished, both Sahil and Anay had been in the Mahalakshmi layout area. Their phones had pinged off the same tower within minutes of each other. The possibility that they could have crossed paths, knowingly or unknowingly, at Reema's house became strong. If they had been there together, the crime might have been the result of a confrontation that spiraled out of control. If they had been there separately, then one of them had surely known the other was involved afterward. The most chilling theory emerged when investigators considered a scenario of collusion. Could Sahil have lured Reema into a false sense of security, while Anay carried out the murder? Could the two men have agreed to hide her death together for their own reasons? One motivated by rage, the other by greed. The idea was almost unthinkable, but evidence hinted that it might be true. The crime scene bore marks of careful concealment, wrapping the body in plastic, sealing the fridge with tape, ensuring the house appeared undisturbed. This was not the hurried work of a single person in panic. It suggested method and planning. The story spread rapidly in the media, turning the Mahalakshmi Fridge Case into a nightmare that captivated Bengaluru. People debated endlessly about whether Reema had been the victim of a love triangle, gone horribly wrong, or the target of two men who had exploited her in different ways. Each headline grew more sensational than the last, each revelation drawing crowds of curiosity outside the police station. Behind the chaos, the investigators remained focused on hard facts. The fridge purchase tied Anay firmly to the crime, while the possessions found in Sahil's home tied him as well. Neither man could escape suspicion. The case that had begun with a missing woman had now turned into one of the most disturbing stories the city had ever witnessed. A story of betrayal, rage, and chilling calculation. The question that remained was not whether Reema had been murdered, but how many hands were truly stained with her blood. The trial that followed the Mahalakshmi Fridge Case became one of the most closely watched proceedings in Bengaluru's recent memory. The courtroom was crowded every day with journalists, neighbors, and curious citizens, all eager to witness the unraveling of the case that had shocked the city. At the center of it all stood two men, Anay Vardel and Sahil Triven, both accused of playing pivotal roles in the brutal murder and concealment of Reema. The prosecution worked tirelessly to present the mountain of evidence gathered, and each new detail revealed to the court seemed darker than the last. The fridge itself became the most damning piece of evidence. Purchase records clearly proved that Anay had bought it only days before the murder. The store manager testified, identifying him as the customer. This single act painted the picture of premeditation. The prosecution argued that Anay had not only planned to kill his estranged wife, but had also decided beforehand how to dispose of her body. To them, the fridge was not just an appliance, but a chilling symbol of his intent. The defense attempted to suggest that he had bought it for personal use, but the timing was impossible to ignore. Then came the evidence against Sahil. Items belonging to Reema were found hidden in his apartment, and the financial trail between them was undeniable. Bank records showed that she had transferred money to him, sometimes large amounts. Witnesses from her workplace confirmed that she had been under stress in the weeks before her disappearance.
Worried about financial matters she never explained openly. To the prosecution, this demonstrated that Sahil had been manipulating her for money, and when things escalated, he became complicit in covering up the crime. The defense for Sahil argued that the belongings were gifts, and that the money transfers were voluntary, but the narrative of innocence was weakened by phone records. On the day of Reema's disappearance, Sahil and Anay's phones had both been active in the Mahalakshmi layout area within the same time frame. This revelation created the possibility of their joint involvement. The prosecution did not miss the chance to highlight this overlap, arguing that whether by confrontation or conspiracy, both men were tied together by the evidence. As forensic experts testified about the condition of Reema's body, the courtroom grew heavy with silence. They explained the signs of strangulation, the bruises that suggested a struggle, and the way she had been forced into the fridge. The details were horrifying, and the audience sat frozen as the reality of her final moments was laid bare. For many, the question was no longer about guilt, but about the level of cruelty displayed. Public reaction outside the courtroom was intense. News channels ran non-stop coverage, with panels debating the case late into the night. The community of Mahalakshmi layout remained haunted by the knowledge that such a terrible act had been committed in one of their quiet streets. Some saw Anay as the primary villain, driven by rage and a refusal to let go of his wife. Others believed Sahil had played a bigger role than he admitted, exploiting her trust until it ended in tragedy. But in the eyes of the law, both bore responsibility. After weeks of testimony, arguments, and cross-examinations, the court finally delivered its judgment. Anay Vardel was sentenced to life imprisonment for the murder of Reema Suryan. His calculated purchase of the fridge and the history of harassment made his role undeniable. Sahil Triven, though not the one who carried out the killing, was sentenced to a lengthy prison term for aiding in the concealment of the crime and obstructing justice. The verdict brought some measure of closure, but no true sense of relief. For Reema's friends and family, justice felt like a hollow comfort. The bright young woman who had tried to rebuild her life independently had been silenced in the most brutal way. Her story became a warning that even in a city as vibrant as Bengaluru, darkness could lurk in the most familiar places. The Mahalakshmi Fridge Case was remembered not only for its horror, but also for the way it exposed the dangers of obsession, betrayal, and misplaced trust. It left behind scars that would not easily fade, a grim reminder that some crimes forever stain the memory of a city.